May 24, 1940. Near the Aar Canal, northern France. General Major Heinz Guderian stood on elevated ground, field glasses trained on a site that would haunt German military thinking for generations. Through the morning haze, just 12 miles distant, he could see the medieval walls and church spires of Dunkirk. His 19th Panzer Corps, spearhead of the greatest military victory in German history, sat poised to deliver the final blow that would destroy the British Expeditionary Force and potentially end the war in the West. Then came the order that would transform triumph into one of history's great what-ifs. Halt immediately. Do not cross the canal. Guderian was, by his own later admission in his memoir Panzer Leader, left speechless. He would call this moment having the most disastrous influence on the whole future course of the war. Behind him stretched a trail of stunning victories: the breakthrough at Sedan, the race to the sea that had cut off the Allied armies, the seemingly impossible achievement of reaching the English Channel in just 10 days. Ahead lay approximately 400,000 Allied soldiers trapped against the sea, apparently helpless. Yet at this crucial moment, with victory literally within sight, the German war machine ground to a halt. This is the story of Dunkirk as the Germans experienced it, not as a miraculous deliverance, but as a victory incomplete, an opportunity squandered, and a psychological turning point that would reshape the entire war. It's a story told through the eyes of German soldiers who watched in frustration as vessels spirited away an army they had defeated, through the testimonies of panzer commanders ordered to hold their positions while their prey escaped, and through the reflections of veterans who spent decades wondering what might have been. When German forces launched Fall Gelb, Case Yellow, on May 10, 1940, they represented the culmination of revolutionary military thinking. Army Group A, commanded by Generaloberst Gerd von Rundstedt, controlled the main striking force. Under Rundstedt served the 4th Army under Günther von Kluge, the 12th under Wilhelm List, and the 16th under Ernst Busch. But the real cutting edge was Panzer Group Kleist, containing the concentrated armour that would slice through France. The audacious plan, conceived by Generalleutnant Erich von Manstein and championed by Hitler himself, called for the unexpected. While Army Group B under Fedor von Bock advanced into Holland and Belgium in an apparent repeat of the 1914 Schlieffen Plan, the real blow would come through the impenetrable Ardennes forest. Here, Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps would achieve what many considered impossible. Guderian commanded 3 powerful divisions: the 1st Panzer Division under Friedrich Kirchner, 2nd Panzer Division under Rudolf Feil, and 10th Panzer Division under Ferdinand Scharl. Parallel to Guderian, General der Infanterie Hermann Hoth's 15th Corps advanced with 2 more formations: the 5th Panzer Division and the 7th Panzer Division, commanded by an ambitious general named Erwin Rommel. Within days, Rommel's division would earn the nickname Ghost Division for its habit of appearing where least expected. The breakthrough came with stunning speed. By May 13th, Guderian's forces had crossed the Meuse at Sedan after a devastating Luftwaffe bombardment by Fliegerkorps 8 under Wolfram von Richthofen, cousin of the legendary Red Baron. The French defences crumbled under the combined assault of tanks, dive bombers, and motorised infantry. Hans von Luck, commanding a reconnaissance battalion in Rommel's 7th Panzer Division, later recalled in his memoir Panzer Commander, reaching the Meuse in just 3 days, a pace that astonished even the Germans themselves. The secret to this incredible speed lay not just in the tanks, but in a new way of war. Forward Luftwaffe liaison officers, equipped with radios, could call in Stuka dive bomber strikes within 45 minutes. The screaming Ju-87s of Sturzkampfgeschwader II and St. G-77, their sirens wailing, shattered enemy morale before the panzers arrived. It was psychological warfare wedded to mechanical precision. By May 20th, the impossible had happened. Armoured spearheads from the 2nd Panzer Division reached Noyelles-sur-Mer on the English Channel. In just 10 days, German forces had driven a corridor to the sea, cutting the Allied armies in two. The speed of advance had been so rapid that even Hitler expressed disbelief at his headquarters. Yet success brought its own problems. Tank losses through mechanical breakdown and combat had mounted alarmingly. Some panzer units reported being down to 50% strength by May 21st. Supply lines stretched dangerously thin across hundreds of miles. Infantry divisions struggled to keep pace with the racing armour. Then came Arras. On May 21st, Rommel's 7th Panzer Division, advancing confidently, suddenly found itself under attack by British tanks at Arras. The impact was immediate and shocking. Rommel's official war diary recorded the division's casualties as 89 killed, 116 wounded, and 173 missing, more than in the entire breakthrough to that point. Rommel himself was forced to personally direct anti-tank guns, later writing in his reports that he personally gave each gun its target. The psychological impact reached German high command. Kleist's headquarters grew concerned about exposed flanks. Though the British attack was eventually beaten off, it had planted doubt in German minds. Were the panzers too far ahead? Were they walking into a trap? By May 23rd, German forces held Boulogne and were besieging Calais. The entire British Expeditionary Force, the French First Army, and elements of the Belgian Army were compressed into a shrinking pocket with their backs to the sea. At German headquarters, the mood was triumphant. Wehrmacht communiques prepared to announce the greatest annihilation battle of all time. On the evening of May 23, 1940, General Oberst Gerd von Rundstedt made a decision that would echo through history. Concerned about reports from his panzer commanders, Kleist had reported tank strength significantly reduced, supply lines overstretched, and the Arras attack had demonstrated Allied capacity for surprise. Rundstedt issued a preliminary order to halt. The next morning, Adolf Hitler arrived at Rundstedt's headquarters at Charleville-Mézières. According to Franz Halder's diary, chief of the General Staff, at 12:42 on May 24th, the fateful order was transmitted. By order of the Führer, attack northwest of Arras is to be limited to the general line Lens-Bethune, Airest-Omer-Gravelines. The canal will not be crossed, Halder noted with frustration. The Führer is terribly nervous, afraid to take any chances. The halt order had multiple fathers. Rundstedt worried about his flanks and wanted infantry to catch up. Hitler, haunted by his First World War experience in Flanders, believed the marshy terrain around Dunkirk unsuitable for tanks. But perhaps the most decisive voice came via telephone from Hermann Göring. The Reichsmarschall had promised that his Luftwaffe would destroy the Dunkirk pocket from above. Why risk precious panzers when the Air Force could finish the job? The impact at the front was immediate. Guderian, whose 19th Panzer Corps sat within sight of Dunkirk, was furious. His 1st Panzer Division had already thrown bridging equipment across the AAA Canal. Some reconnaissance units had crossed. Now they were ordered to pull back and assume defensive positions. For 3 crucial days, German soldiers sat idle as the evacuation began to unfold before their eyes. Through binoculars, they watched as an armada began to gather off the French coast. Destroyers, passenger ferries, fishing boats, private yachts, anything that could float and carry men. Wehrmacht war diaries from frontline units describe the frustration. The 2nd Panzer Division's engineers spent May 25th building bridges over the canal system, preparing for the advance they assumed must surely come. Artillery units maintained harassment fire on the beaches and port. But the main striking power of the Wehrmacht, its concentrated armour, sat idle. On the evening of May 26th, Hitler finally rescinded the halt order. But it would take another 16 hours for units to resume their advance. By then, the Allies had gained 4 precious days to organise defences and begin Operation Dynamo in earnest. When German forces finally moved forward on May 27th, they found organised resistance instead of the chaos they had expected. Hermann Göring's assurance to Hitler that his Luftwaffe would destroy the Allied pocket represented one of the war's great miscalculations. The forces at his disposal seemed overwhelming. Luftflotte 2 under General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring and Luftflotte 3 under Hugo Sperle, with Fliegerkorps 8 commanded by Wolfram von Richthofen containing the Stuka dive bombers. In total, over 300 bombers and 550 fighters stood ready. May 27th marked Operation Dynamo's first full day and the Luftwaffe's concentrated attempt to fulfill Göring's promise. German squadrons attacked in waves from 7 in the morning until dusk. Dunkirk harbour was set ablaze, the oil tanks creating black smoke visible for miles. Yet the Fliegerkorps 2 war diary would record unexpected resistance from RAF Fighter Command. Spitfires and Hurricanes operating from southern England engaged German formations. The Luftwaffe lost 23 aircraft that first day alone. Among the losses were experienced crews that could not easily be replaced. The fundamental problem was endurance. The Messerschmitt Bf 109E, operating from Belgian bases, had barely 10 minutes over Dunkirk before fuel concerns forced them home. The Stukas, so devastating when protected, proved vulnerable to modern fighters when their escorts departed. Weather proved equally challenging. Of the 9 evacuation days, only 2.5 provided good flying conditions. On May 28th, clouds and smoke from burning oil obscured targets. Kesselring protested to Göring that crews were exhausted after 2 weeks of intensive operations. The Luftwaffe's greatest success came on June 1st, when clearing weather allowed maximum effort. 4 destroyers were sunk along with other vessels. Yet by then, most of the BEF had already escaped. Despite flying 1,882 bombing and 1,997 fighter sorties, the Luftwaffe had failed to prevent the evacuation. German pilot Joachim Müncheberg of Jagdgeschwader 26 flew escort missions throughout the evacuation. His combat reports note claiming 5 Spitfires, including 4 on May 31st alone, earning him the Iron Cross First Class. Yet even this ace noted the intensity of British resistance and the challenges of operating at maximum range. When German ground forces resumed their advance on May 27th, they encountered transformed defences. The British had used their respite to establish a formidable perimeter along the canal lines. French forces, particularly the First Army, had begun a last stand that would tie down German divisions desperately needed elsewhere. The German 18th Corps War Diary describes the 56th Infantry Division advancing through flooded ground toward the Dunkirk perimeter, suffering heavy casualties from prepared British positions. The division became combat ineffective and had to be withdrawn. Robert Kershaw's research in Dunkirk in 1940 reveals there was virtually no plan to reduce the pocket. Units attacked piecemeal, without coordination. Only 5 of 10 German divisions surrounding Dunkirk could operate effectively from dry ground due to flooding. The siege of Lille proved particularly costly. 7 German divisions became embroiled in a 4-day battle against 40,000 French defenders. The garrison finally surrendered on May 31st, but their sacrifice had tied down forces that might have made the difference at Dunkirk. General Weger, commanding German forces at Lille, noted in his after-action report that French resistance exceeded all expectations. German artillery observers documented extraordinary scenes on the beaches. Wehrmacht records describe long lines of men stretching from the dunes into the water, maintaining discipline even under fire. The variety of vessels particularly struck observers, everything from Royal Navy destroyers to Thames pleasure steamers, from fishing trawlers to private yachts. One divisional war diary noted, "The enemy maintains remarkable order during evacuation. Small craft shuttle continuously between beach and larger vessels despite our artillery fire. The spontaneous mobilization of civilian vessels was completely unexpected by German military planners. General Ritter von Thoma, whose tanks sat immobilized by orders and terrain, later testified he could see directly into Dunkirk through field glasses, watching British rearguard units conduct textbook fighting withdrawals. The professionalism of these supposedly defeated troops contradicted German propaganda about democratic armies. German soldiers' letters preserved in the Bundesarchive reveal complex reactions to Dunkirk. Initial confidence about imminent British surrender gradually gave way to uncertainty as Britain continued fighting. The masses of abandoned equipment, 2,472 guns, 84,427 vehicles, 657,566 tons of stores, according to Wehrmacht tallies, seemed to confirm the BEF's destruction as a fighting force. Yet Wehrmacht intelligence reports noted growing unease among troops. If defeated armies could escape so successfully, what might defending ones achieve? The psychological impact was particularly acute among units that had suffered unexpected casualties against British rearguards. The SS Totenkopf Division's massacre of British prisoners at Le Paradis on May 27th and Wehrmacht on May 28th reflected breakdown of discipline when faced with fiercer resistance than expected. These war crimes, documented in post-war trials, revealed the psychological strain on poorly trained units. Sönke Neitzel's analysis of German POW conversations, recorded secretly by British intelligence, reveals how deeply Dunkirk affected German military thinking. Veterans consistently described it as the missed opportunity when war could have been won. Post-war German military studies identified Dunkirk as the point where strategic momentum shifted. While Germany would achieve more victories, the opportunity for quick triumph had passed. Every subsequent campaign would be fought with Britain actively opposing. Franz Halder's diary provides the most detailed contemporary criticism of the halt order. His May 24th entry noted Hitler was terribly nervous and afraid to take any chances. Halder had opposed the halt, believing the Luftwaffe was dependent upon the weather. Heinz Guderian's post-war memoir, Panzer Leader, identified the halt as having the most disastrous influence on the war's course. His bitterness was professional. His corps had been within striking distance of Dunkirk when stopped. Rundstedt's position evolved significantly. Initially supporting the halt due to tank losses and overextended flanks, he later claimed it was entirely Hitler's decision. This claim, unsupported by contemporary evidence, became part of post-war mythology shifting blame to the dead Hitler. Hermann Göring never publicly admitted error, but the Luftwaffe's failure permanently damaged his standing. Internal Luftwaffe assessments highlighted fundamental problems: extreme range, weather dependency, and unexpected RAF effectiveness. Kesselring and Richthoven's after-action reports emphasized that their forces were exhausted after 2 weeks of intensive operations. The Luftwaffe lost between 156 and 240 aircraft during the evacuation, losses that would be felt during the Battle of Britain. While attention focused on Dunkirk's beaches, 40,000 French soldiers conducted one of the war's most heroic stands at Lille. For 4 days they held 7 German divisions, including 3 armoured divisions. German unit records reveal grudging respect for French tenacity. General Wege's forces suffered significant casualties in urban combat for which they were poorly prepared. When the garrison surrendered on May 31st, German soldiers rendered military honours, a rare gesture reflecting genuine respect. Churchill later calculated that Lille's defence enabled 100,000 additional evacuations. German intelligence reports expressed frustration at French defensive tactics around the Dunkirk perimeter. Using flooding advantageously, French forces turned approaches into killing fields. The 68th Infantry Division beat back German attacks even as the evacuation proceeded. Wehrmacht reports noted French units maintained discipline even after Belgium's surrender on May 28th exposed their flank. German commanders had expected French morale to collapse, but found increased determination instead. German soldiers advancing into Dunkirk after June 4th found extraordinary quantities of abandoned equipment. Wehrmacht quartermasters catalogued 2,472 artillery pieces, 84,427 vehicles, 657,566 tons of ammunition and stores. Propaganda companies filmed endless footage of captured material. This material windfall created false assumptions. German leadership, seeing such massive losses, assumed Britain was effectively disarmed. This influenced Operation Sea Lion planning and contributed to underestimating British resilience. By May 24th, German tank strength had been significantly reduced through combat and mechanical failure. Panzer III and IV tanks proved less reliable than expected during sustained operations. Some divisions reported only 50% operational strength. This mechanical reality influenced the halt decision. With full rot, case read, still planned against remaining French forces, preserving armour became paramount. Every tank lost at Dunkirk would be unavailable for the drive on Paris. Wehrmacht intelligence had calculated that at most 30,000 to 45,000 troops might escape by sea. The evacuation of over 330,000 Allied troops was completely outside German planning assumptions. German doctrine emphasized Kesselschlacht, cauldron battles where surrounded forces surrendered. The concept of maritime evacuation on this scale was outside Wehrmacht experience. The spontaneous mobilization of civilian vessels, the little ships, was entirely unexpected. German High Command fundamentally misread Dunkirk's significance. Hitler's June 5th proclamation claimed the BEF was destroyed. The abandoned equipment seemed to confirm this. German planning for invading Britain assumed they would face demoralized, poorly equipped forces. Instead, evacuated troops formed the experienced core around which Britain rebuilt its army. The Dunkirk spirit that emerged proved more powerful than German calculations had anticipated. Hitler's headquarters at Felsenest, near Bad Münstereifel, was where the halt order originated. Staff officers later described Hitler's mood swings, initial exhilaration at the breakthrough, followed by increasing nervousness as panzers raced ahead. Halder documented Hitler's fear that success had come too easily, that some trap awaited. This paranoia, rooted in Hitler's First World War experience, influenced the crucial decision. The halt order went directly from Hitler to frontline units, bypassing normal military channels. During the evacuation, headquarters received increasingly frantic reports about Allied escape. Yet Hitler seemed unconcerned, convinced Britain would sue for peace. This strategic blindness would prove fatal to Nazi Germany's ambitions. Joseph Goebbels faced the challenge of presenting the escape of hundreds of thousands as victory. German newspapers focused on territory gained and equipment captured while minimizing the evacuation's significance. The Völkischer Beobachter proclaimed, "the greatest annihilation battle of all time." Wehrmacht communiques maintained this fiction. The June 5th announcement emphasized prisoners and material captured without mentioning those who escaped. This created a gap between official propaganda and what frontline soldiers had witnessed. The German public initially had no grasp of the evacuation's scale. However, soldiers on leave gradually spread word about the armies that escaped. Secret police reports from summer 1940 reveal growing public concern about continuing war against Britain. The Luftwaffe's subsequent defeat in the Battle of Britain and the cancellation of Operation Sea Lion confirmed suspicions that opportunity had been lost at Dunkirk. The failure to destroy the BEF fundamentally altered German invasion planning for Britain. Operation Sea Lion planners had to account for hundreds of thousands of experienced troops they assumed would be prisoners. Admiral Raeder argued that if Britain could evacuate forces under fire, they could certainly prevent invasion. The Luftwaffe's failure at Dunkirk raised doubts about achieving air superiority necessary for invasion. Wehrmacht studies identified multiple problems revealed by Dunkirk: British ability to mobilize civilian resources, tenacious defense capabilities, and naval superiority. These factors contributed to Sea Lion's eventual cancellation. Dunkirk's ultimate consequence was ensuring Germany would face the two-front war it desperately sought to avoid. By allowing Britain to remain in the war, Germany guaranteed eventual American involvement and sustained Western pressure while fighting the Soviet Union. German military professionals spent the war analysing the Dunkirk decision. Staff studies identified it as where strategic momentum shifted permanently. Every subsequent campaign would face British opposition, organising coalitions, and serving as the base for eventual Allied invasion. Hans von Luck's reconnaissance battalion in the 7th Panzer Division had led Rommel's thrust through Belgium, reaching the Meuse in 3 days. In his memoir, Panzer Commander, von Luck described the frustration of watching the evacuation while ordered to halt. "We could not understand why we let so many get away," von Luck wrote. His reconnaissance units, trained to exploit weakness, sat idle while enemy forces escaped. The professional soldier in him recognized this strategic failure even as propaganda proclaimed victory. Rommel's after-action report from Arras, preserved in the Bundesarchiv, describes near disaster on May 21st. British Matilda tanks had torn through his division's flank. Rommel personally directed anti-tank guns, using 88mm flak guns in ground roll to restore the situation. The psychological impact on German command was significant. If 2 British battalions could cause such disruption, what might coordinated counter-offensive achieve? This fear contributed to the cautious halt order. Wehrmacht artillery observers documented the evacuation through their rangefinders. Unit war diaries describe beaches resembling disturbed anthills, with long queues maintaining discipline under fire. The variety of vessels, from warships to pleasure craft, demonstrated British improvisation capacity German planners hadn't anticipated. Luftwaffe unit records detail the challenges of the Dunkirk operation. Jagdgeschwader 26's war diary notes the strain of maximum range operations. Pilots had minimal time over target before fuel-forced return. Stuka units reported heavy losses when fighter escort departed. Weather reports from Luftflotte 2 and 3 show that poor conditions prevailed for most of the evacuation period. Smoke from burning oil tanks further obscured targets. Kesselring's protests to Göring about crew exhaustion went unheeded. Joachim Müncheberg of JG-26 achieved ace status during Dunkirk operations, claiming multiple Spitfires. Yet his combat reports note the unexpected intensity of RAF resistance. British fighters appeared in greater numbers than intelligence had predicted. The Luftwaffe's June 1st maximum effort sank several ships but came too late. Most evacuations were complete. Despite nearly 4,000 sorties flown, the Air Force had failed to deliver Göring's promise. Post-war interviews with German veterans consistently identified Dunkirk as the war's turning point. In testimony for the U.S. Army's Historical Division, former Wehrmacht officers described it as the moment victory slipped away. General Ritter von Thoma, interviewed by Basil Liddell-Hart, stated, "I was right out in front near Bergay. From there I could see everything happening in Dunkirk." His frustration at being held back remained evident years later. Military historians have extensively analysed the halt order. The German official history, Das Deutsche Reich und der Zweite Weltkrieg, identifies multiple factors: tank losses, stretched supply lines, Hitler's nervousness, and Göring's assurances. Modern analysis emphasises that the halt order, while significant, was not the sole factor in the evacuation's success. French resistance, British determination, and German exhaustion all contributed to the outcome. The Dunkirk experience fundamentally affected German military doctrine. The failure to prevent maritime evacuation led to increased emphasis on coastal defence and anti-shipping capabilities. However, these lessons came too late to affect the war's outcome. Wehrmacht staff studies from 1941 to 1945 repeatedly cited Dunkirk as demonstrating the danger of incomplete victory. The escape of defeated armies to fight another day challenged German concepts of decisive battle. The German perspective on Dunkirk must account for the human cost of the entire French campaign. German forces suffered between 120,000 and 160,000 casualties during the Battle of France, a relatively light toll for such a comprehensive victory, but one that included significant losses around Dunkirk itself. The evacuation statistics tell their own story. British forces evacuated, 338,226. French and Belgian forces evacuated, 139,997. German prisoners captured at Dunkirk, approximately 40,000. Luftwaffe aircraft lost, 156 to 240. German equipment captured, minimal but tactical advantage lost. These numbers represented a peculiar victory, tactical success with strategic implications that would prove disastrous. The halt order remains one of military history's most studied decisions. Multiple factors contributed: mechanical limitations, supply concerns, command caution, inter-service rivalry, and fundamental misunderstanding of enemy capabilities. German military education after the war used Dunkirk as a case study in the dangers of incomplete victory. The Wehrmacht's own analysis concluded that political interference, inter-service rivalry, and failure to understand enemy psychology had transformed triumph into eventual defeat. From the German perspective, Dunkirk represents history's most paradoxical military outcome: overwhelming tactical success that contained the seeds of strategic catastrophe. The Wehrmacht achieved everything military professionals thought possible: breakthrough, encirclement, and pursuit to the sea in mere weeks. They shattered Allied armies, captured vast territories, and stood on the brink of ending the Western War. Yet at the crucial moment, through a combination of command hesitation, inter-service rivalry, and fundamental misunderstanding of their enemy's resolve, they allowed the core of future Allied victory to escape. The halt order of May 24th to 26th, 1940, stands as one of the most consequential military decisions in modern history. Had the panzers advanced? Had Guderian been permitted to close the trap? Had the Luftwaffe succeeded in its mission? The Second World War might have followed an entirely different trajectory. Britain, deprived of its professional army, might have been forced to negotiate. The United States might never have found its entry point into the European conflict. The Soviet Union might have faced Germany alone, with catastrophic consequences for world history. Instead, Dunkirk became the pivot point where German expansion reached its limit and began its long recession. The German soldiers who watched the evacuation witnessed, without fully comprehending, the moment when quick victory transformed into protracted defeat. They had achieved battlefield success while failing strategically, the very definition of a Pyrrhic victory. The German accounts of Dunkirk, preserved in war diaries, official reports, and post-war testimonies, provide essential perspective on how military excellence can coexist with strategic blindness. The Wehrmacht demonstrated tactical brilliance while failing to grasp war's political dimensions. They won battles while losing the broader conflict, achieved operational success while ensuring strategic defeat. For the German soldiers who stood on Dunkirk's perimeter in late May and early June 1940, the future remained unknowable. They saw abandoned equipment, fleeing enemies, and confirmation of German military superiority. They could not foresee that the miracle of their rapid victory would be overshadowed by the miracle of Allied escape, that the soldiers boarding those miscellaneous vessels would return 4 years later as liberators and conquerors. The German perspective on Dunkirk ultimately reveals the complexity of military victory and defeat. It was simultaneously their greatest triumph and most catastrophic failure, proof of tactical superiority and strategic myopia. The beaches where German soldiers once stood watching their enemies escape became the symbol of opportunity lost, of victory incomplete, of the moment when the war's outcome, though not yet determined, began its inexorable shift away from German success. Today, when the last witnesses have passed into history, we are left with their testimonies, a reminder that military events must be understood from multiple perspectives. The German view of Dunkirk shows us that victory and defeat are rarely absolute, that tactical success without strategic wisdom proves hollow, and that the moral dimensions of warfare often outweigh the purely military. The German tragedy at Dunkirk was not that they failed militarily. By every conventional measure, they had succeeded brilliantly. Their tragedy lay in the failure to understand that wars are won not merely through battlefield success, but through breaking an enemy's will to resist. At Dunkirk, they destroyed an army's equipment while strengthening a nation's resolve. The evacuation that German soldiers watched with such frustration became the foundation of British resistance, the seedbed of the special relationship with America, and ultimately the launching point for liberation. For Germany, Dunkirk marked both the apex of military achievement and the beginning of inevitable decline. The panzer commanders who sat idle by the Aar Canal, the Luftwaffe pilots who failed to stop the ships, the infantry who watched the beaches empty, all were unwitting participants in one of history's great turning points. They had won everything except what mattered most, the chance to end the war before it consumed their nation and continent. This, then, is the German perspective on Dunkirk, a masterpiece of military art that failed strategically, a victory that ensured defeat, a moment of triumph that guaranteed tragedy. The voices of German participants remind us that Dunkirk was not simply a British deliverance, but a German disaster. Not just an evacuation, but an evaporation of strategic opportunity that would never return. The Wehrmacht forces that departed Dunkirk in June 1940 left behind more than empty beaches and abandoned equipment. They left behind their best chance for quick victory, for limited war, for avoiding the catastrophe that would engulf Germany and Europe. Their accounts, preserved in archives and memories, ensure that the German perspective on Dunkirk remains part of our understanding, a cautionary tale about the limits of military power and the dangers of incomplete victory. In the end, the German experience at Dunkirk teaches us that military history is never simple, that victory and defeat intertwine in complex ways, and that the consequences of command decisions echo far beyond the battlefield. The German soldiers who witnessed the evacuation earned a peculiar place in history, victors who enabled their own defeat, conquerors who opened the door to their own conquest, witnesses to the moment when tactical brilliance collided with strategic blindness. Their story deserves remembrance not to glorify Wehrmacht achievements or excuse Nazi aggression, but to understand the full complexity of one of history's most consequential military operations. The German perspective on Dunkirk reminds us that every triumph contains the seeds of potential disaster, that military success without political wisdom proves futile, and that understanding the past requires examining events through multiple lenses. The beaches of Dunkirk, where German soldiers once stood in frustration watching their enemies escape, remain a monument to the paradoxes of war. For Britain, they represent deliverance and determination. For France, sacrifice and abandonment. And for Germany, they stand as eternal testimony to the victory that slipped away, the triumph that became tragedy, the moment when winning the battle meant losing the war.